One of the most persistent misconceptions about attraction is the belief that being liked creates desire. Many men assume that if they are agreeable, attentive, and accommodating enough, attraction will naturally follow. Psychologically, the opposite tends to happen. The moment you shift your focus from self-direction to approval-seeking, desire begins to fade. Not because liking is bad, but because the attempt to be liked signals a loss of internal authority. Attraction is not built on pleasing behavior. It's built on emotional stability, self-respect, and the ability to remain grounded regardless of how others respond. If you're here to understand attraction, influence, and confidence from a serious psychological perspective, consider subscribing. This channel focuses on internal mastery, not surface-level tactics. Trying to be liked reveals where your self-worth is coming from. At a psychological level, the desire to be liked is rarely about connection. It's about validation. When a man tries to be liked, he subtly communicates that his emotional state depends on how others perceive him. This dependence is felt immediately, even if it's never articulated. People are highly attuned to where others derive their sense of worth. When your behavior shifts based on whether you're being accepted or approved of, it reveals that your internal framework is unstable. Desire requires the opposite. It requires the sense that someone is self-contained, emotionally regulated, and operating from inner clarity rather than external feedback. In social or romantic interactions, this shows up as over-agreeing, excessive reassurance, or altering opinions to maintain harmony. While this may create short-term comfort, it erodes long-term attraction because it removes psychological tension. Desire needs contrast, autonomy, and emotional independence to exist. One of the core drivers of attraction is self-direction. A man who knows what he values, what he wants, and where he's going and moves accordingly creates a sense of grounded presence. When you attempt to be liked, your behavior becomes negotiable. You begin adjusting yourself in real time based on reactions, moods, or subtle cues. This emotional negotiation communicates uncertainty. Consider dating conversations where a man constantly checks whether what he said was okay, backtracks statements to avoid disapproval, or, softens his preferences just to appear more agreeable. None of this is offensive, but it quietly signals a lack of internal anchor. A self-directed man can express warmth and interest without reshaping himself for acceptance. That internal stability is what actually generates attraction, not the absence of friction. Being kind is not the problem. The issue arises when kindness becomes a strategy for approval rather than an expression of character. Boundaries are, absolutely essential to attraction because they really demonstrate self-respect and emotional clarity. When you try too hard to be liked, those boundaries often just dissolve. You become more available than you should be, more accommodating than feels natural, and honestly, less upfront about your limits. Psychologically, boundaries create definition. They signal that your time, attention, and energy, they have real value. When boundaries disappear, interactions just lose their shape. In dating, this can look like always being available, tolerating behavior that doesn't align with your values, or even avoiding honest communication just to keep the peace. While this might prevent some short-term discomfort, it actually diminishes desire because it signals that you don't, prioritize yourself. A man who tries to be liked often sacrifices emotional control. He reacts quickly, explains excessively, or adjusts his tone to manage how others feel. Emotional regulation, however, is, honestly, one of the strongest indicators of internal dominance. When you remain composed regardless of external response, you communicate strength without force. For example, if someone challenges you or expresses disagreement, responding calmly and clearly, without defensiveness or over-explanation, signals confidence. If instead you rush to smooth things over, justify yourself, or seek reassurance, you communicate that emotional equilibrium depends on approval. Desire, responds to emotional self-sufficiency, not emotional accommodation. Influence operates on a similar psychological principle. People are influenced by those who appear grounded, decisive, and internally consistent. The moment your goal becomes being liked, your influence weakens because your positions become flexible and reactive. Others sense that your stance can be negotiated through approval or disapproval. In leadership or work environments, this often shows up as reluctance to make unpopular decisions or constant justification of choices. While, collaboration is important, leadership really requires the ability to tolerate disagreement without destabilization. The same principle, honestly, applies in attraction. A man who can stand by his decisions calmly, even when they're not immediately validated, commands more respect and interest than someone who reshapes himself just to maintain likability. Attraction is built on polarity, the psychological tension between autonomy and connection. When you try too hard to be liked, you actually collapse that polarity by over-prioritizing connection. You move closer, soften edges, and reduce contrast. This, makes interactions feel safe but uncharged. A man who maintains polarity does not withdraw warmth, but he doesn't chase approval either. He allows space for difference, uncertainty, and natural tension. This might mean expressing an honest opinion, even if it risks disagreement, or taking time for himself without needing to explain or reassure. Polarity keeps desire alive because it preserves individuality within connection. Presence is one of the most underestimated components of attraction. Presence means being fully engaged without performing, monitoring, or adjusting yourself constantly. When you try to be liked, your attention moves outward. You start tracking reactions, analyzing responses, and modifying behavior in real time. This pulls you out of presence and into performance. In conversation, this can feel like talking too much, filling silences, or oversharing to maintain engagement. A present man, by contrast, listens attentively, responds thoughtfully, and allows moments of silence without anxiety. Presence communicates calm authority. Performance communicates need, desire responds to presence. Many men attempt to explain their value, intentions, or goodness when trying to be liked. Psychologically, self-respect is not something that needs explanation. It's felt through consistency, boundaries, and emotional regulation. When you explain yourself excessively, you often undermine the very authority you're trying to establish. In dating, this might look like justifying why you're busy, why you said no, or why you have certain standards. A self-respecting man communicates his choices clearly and allows others to respond. He doesn't negotiate his worth through explanations. This restraint signals internal stability, which is inherently attractive. One of the paradoxes of attraction is that desire flows toward those who don't require it to feel whole. When you try to be liked, you implicitly communicate that acceptance is necessary for your emotional equilibrium. This creates pressure, even if unspoken. A man who is emotionally complete without validation creates relief instead of pressure. This doesn't mean emotional detachment or indifference. It means your sense of self remains intact regardless of outcome. You can enjoy connection without clinging to it. You can pursue interest without chasing validation. That balance is where attraction naturally emerges. So the shift away from trying to be liked, well, it's not about becoming cold or dismissive. It's really about redefining what guides your behavior. When internal values, standards, and self-respect become the metric, your actions gain, consistency. And consistency builds trust. Trust, in turn, builds attraction. This actually applies across contexts. In work, it looks like making decisions aligned with principles rather than popularity. In relationships, it looks like expressing care without self-abandonment. And in social settings, it looks like being engaged without performing. Internal authority, it simplifies interactions because you're no longer negotiating your identity moment by moment. A significant amount of anxiety in attraction comes from trying to manage how others feel. This kind of management creates tension and, honestly, self-consciousness. When you release the need to control reactions, your nervous system settles. Your communication becomes clearer. Your presence becomes steadier. A man who allows others to respond freely, without chasing reassurance or approval, creates space for genuine desire to form. Desire requires freedom. It cannot be coerced, negotiated, or earned through compliance. It arises when two autonomous individuals choose connection without pressure. The moment you try to be liked, desire begins to disappear, not because kindness or warmth are unattractive, but because approval-seeking undermines internal authority. Attraction is rooted in self-direction, emotional regulation, boundaries, and presence. When you stop shaping yourself for acceptance and start acting from clarity and self-respect, desire has room to exist. Psychological self-mastery is not about controlling others. It's about stabilizing yourself so your presence naturally commands respect and interest. If this perspective resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and share this video with others who value serious psychology and long-term personal development. Mastery begins internally, and when it does, attraction follows without effort. Calm kings,